The Book of Revelation, Chapter 8. At this point in our study of the Book of Revelation, we've already covered the first 6 of the 7 seals of the scroll of the Book of Revelation. We're now ready to begin with the opening of the 7th seal. In Revelation chapter 8, verse 1, we read, "When the Lamb broke the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. Another angel came and stood at the altar, holding a golden censer, and much incense was given to him, so that he might add it to the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, with the prayers of the saints, went up before God out of the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, and filled it with the fire of the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there followed peals of thunder, and sounds, and flashes of lightning, and an earthquake." In this passage we see that the Lamb opens the 7th and last seal of the scroll of the book of Revelation. Although the number 7 usually symbolizes completion within the Bible, the story doesn't end here. Instead, this 7th seal leads to a new phase of revelation. The half hour of silence adds tension and drama to the narrative as the reader senses the calm before the coming storm. This pause in the action might also indicate that God is giving people a chance to avoid further punishment by repenting of their sins. We see that the 7 angels receive 7 trumpets, which are the next phase of the judgment of God and the punishment of sinners on the earth. The other thing that we see in this passage is that another angel, a different angel, offers incense before these 7 trumpets begin to blow. In Revelation chapter 5, verse 8, we saw that the incense in the golden bowls of the 24 elders symbolized the prayers of the saints. Here, incense is mixed with the prayers of the saints like a blend of fragrant spices and frankincense, just as we see in Exodus chapter 34, verses 34 through 36, a fragrant incense was mixed together from several different ingredients. The smoke of this incense goes up before God, symbolizing that the prayers of godly people reach God like a pleasant smell. This scene reminds us that evil has not prevailed. Although some stubbornly refuse to repent, there are others who fear and worship God, and their prayers are coming up before the throne of God like fragrant incense. The third thing that we see in this passage is that this vision is connected with the biblical holy day called the Day of Atonement. One day each year, on a day called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the high priest of Israel was allowed to enter the Holy of Holies under a cloud of fragrant incense. We read about this in Leviticus chapter 16, verse 12. "He," referring to Aaron, the high priest, "shall take a fire pan full of coals of fire from upon the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of finely ground sweet incense, and bring it inside the veil. He shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat that is on the ark of the testimony. Otherwise he will die." So this scene in heaven is very similar to the offering of incense on the altar before God on the Day of Atonement. The fourth thing that we see in this passage is that the angel casts fire to the earth. The angel who offered up the incense filled his censer with hot coals from the altar and then threw them to the earth. The Greek term for earth here is gain, and this Greek term could refer to the floor underneath the altar, or, more likely, it is referring to this planet, Earth, and the sinners who are on it. In literature, this action is called foreshadowing. Within the narrative, it is an omen of things to come when the first trumpet blows. Moving on now to Revelation chapter 8, verse 6. And the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound them. The first sounded, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And 1/3 of the earth was burned up, and 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The first thing that we need to understand about this passage is that trumpets are an important biblical symbol. In ancient times, Israelites used trumpets made out of metal or animal horns for different events. For example, trumpets were blown to call the people to an assembly. They were also used to announce the start of a battle. They were also used to announce the start of holy days and Sabbaths. And they were used to announce the coming of the king. In the book of Revelation, each of these has an end-time connotation. For example, within the book of Revelation, trumpets will sound to call the saints to a great assembly, which is commonly referred to as the rapture. Also within the book of Revelation, these trumpets announce the start of a great battle, which is called Armageddon. And these trumpets also have a prophetic fulfillment which is tied with the biblical holy day, which we call Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Teruah, the day of blowing of trumpets. And finally, these 7 trumpets are also associated with the coming of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. So when we understand the historical and cultural context of trumpets, we see that there is an intimate connection with the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. So when we read the book of Revelation, we need to understand the historic and cultural significance of trumpets to the people of Israel. Jewish Christians in the first century would have immediately recognized the connection with these 7 trumpets and Old Testament history. They would have thought about the story of Joshua leading the children of Israel into the promised land. In the book of Joshua, we see that Israel marched around the city of Jericho once each day for 6 days. In a similar way, Jesus broke 6 of the 7 seals as he gradually unrolled the scroll of the book of Revelation. Then Israel marched around Jericho 7 times on the 7th day, just as Jesus broke the 7th seal to reveal 7 additional trumpet plagues. In the book of Joshua, 7 priests blew their 7 trumpets in order to destroy the walls of Jericho. Just as in the book of Revelation, these 7 angels blow 7 trumpets to destroy Satan's kingdom. So just as Joshua led the armies of God's people to establish God's kingdom over the land of Canaan, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, will establish God's kingdom over the earth. The second thing that we see in this passage is that the first trumpet burns up 1/3 of the earth. This is similar to the plague of hail that fell on Egypt at the time of the Exodus. In Exodus chapter 9, verse 23, Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire, that is, lightning, ran down to the earth, and the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. Instead of bringing rain, this trumpet plague burns up 1/3 of the earth, which sounds more like a massive meteor shower rather than a shower of hail from a thunderstorm. This would be consistent with the image of the angel casting hot coals from the altar to the earth, as we saw in Revelation chapter 8, verse 5. Moving on now to Revelation chapter 8, verse 8. The second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. In this passage we see that the second trumpet destroys a third of the sea. John sees something like a great mountain burning with fire being thrown into the sea. The passive verb tense here, was thrown, indicates that this event is from God's hand. In other words, it's being divinely directed. From the description here in the book of Revelation, this could be a large meteor entering the atmosphere. In the ancient past, many large meteors have struck the earth with great devastating force. For example, a meteor that is 1 kilometer wide would hit the earth with a force of 60,000 megatons of TNT. That's equal to a 9.4 magnitude earthquake rocking the surface of the earth. And it would produce an impact crater 20 kilometers wide. That's 12 miles wide. If the meteor was even larger, the devastation would be even greater. 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered with water, so a large meteor impact would likely hit an ocean. This would destroy marine life on a massive scale and produce tidal waves that would sink many ships. The atmosphere would be filled with smoke and falling debris as the sea boiled and churned. The second thing that we see in this passage is that this plague is similar to the plague of blood that fell on the land of Egypt during the Exodus. The Egyptians murdered the infant sons of the Israelites by casting them into the Nile. God punished the Egyptians for their sin by turning the Nile into blood, so there was no water to drink. The Egyptians worshipped the Nile as a god, but the God of Israel proved his power over nature by cursing the Nile. The second trumpet plague also displays the power of the God of Israel over nature and the false gods of this world. Moving on now to Revelation chapter 8, verse 10. The third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of waters. The name of the star is called Wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. The first thing that we see in this passage is that the third trumpet poisons a third of the fresh water. John sees a great star fall from heaven like a burning torch. The text isn't clear if this star is a natural or supernatural object. Sometimes in the book of Revelation, a star is used as a symbol for an angel. However, based on the description here, this sounds like a comet, meteor, or man-made object entering the atmosphere. Whatever the cause, we see that many people die from the contaminated water. The second thing that we see in this passage is that the star is called wormwood. Wormwood is a bitter desert plant mentioned only here in the New Testament. However, it is mentioned 7 times in the Old Testament where it represents sorrow and bitter judgment. Wormwood contains a substance called thujon, which is potentially poisonous. However, this passage seems to suggest that wormwood is used in a symbolic or metaphoric sense. We should note that missiles and satellites that re-enter the atmosphere often contain very toxic chemical compounds, and if a satellite or missile were carrying a chemical warhead, it would certainly fit in with the description of many waters being poisoned and men dying as a result. Moving on now to Revelation chapter 8, verse 12. The fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars were struck, so that a third of them would be darkened, and the day would not shine for a third of it, and the night in the same way. Then I looked, and I heard an eagle flying in mid-heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. In this passage we see that the fourth trumpet darkens a third of the heavens. God is systematically eliminating 1/3 of the environment. This darkness may be caused by a massive amount of dust, soot, and gas ejected into the lower atmosphere. A thick haze would obscure the horizon and blot out much of the sun, moon, and stars from being seen. This will have a devastating impact on plants and plankton at the bottom of the food chain. Temperatures across the world would drop until CO2 levels begin to rise. This plague is also similar to the plague of darkness that struck Egypt. However, in Egypt that was a total darkness. Here, only a third of the light is dimmed. The second thing that we see in this passage is that the last 3 trumpet plagues will be worse than the first 4. Eagles don't normally speak, so we have a literary clue here that this is either a supernatural event or this eagle is symbolic. Whatever the interpretation, the next 3 plagues are so bad that they are called woes. A threefold repetition, woe, 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 is a literary technique used by authors for emphasis. So in this passage we see that God is pleading with the world, trying to get people to listen. Even after all of these plagues, the world is still not listening to God, still not repenting. That raises an important question that we need to consider today. What would God need to do in our lives today to get our attention? Have we today become spiritually dull of hearing, or are we listening to the important message of the Bible and the book of Revelation? We're ready to move on now to Revelation chapter 9, where the story of the 3 woes, the 3 final trumpet plagues, continues.